There we go. Okay. Thank you all for coming out today for the August Skill Builder. This is a pretty exciting one for me. There's a lot of tedious subjects that I like to read long and boring books about, and I enjoy it, but there are others that I don't want to be an expert in. I just want a resource that I can go to and get an answer. Like, I don't want to know everything about shellac, but I know that if I go and read what Bob Flexner has to say about it, or if I ask Craig Arnold, I might not get the only answer, but I'll get a very good one. So that's how I feel about Bob Behnke and the Franklin Industries regarding adhesives. So when I've watched like Chris Schwartz do glue ups in the past, he always spouts out all this knowledge and information, and he usually says like the only reasons he knows this stuff is because of the people at Franklin, and oftentimes he'll quote Bob by name. So if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me to follow blindly. But yeah, Bob has over 30 years of expertise in this wood sealant and adhesives, and just a wealth of information and knowledge. And so please welcome me and welcoming Bob Behnke for maybe the last time. Been a long time friend of the guild, so thank you, Bob.
Retiring January 31st, then I'll be walking the Appalachian Trail, so that'll be fun. So I don't know anybody. I'm the technical service manager for Franklin International for the construction products, which include really all of our, direct-to-consumer products, the things that go in small bottles. We do have an industrial group. They're smallest size, so to them, this size is a 5-gallon pail. They don't like selling 5-gallon pails. They'd rather sell drums and totes and rail cars and tank trucks. So that's kind of the size that they sell. Who has been to this presentation before? So as I see most people, they usually come. I've had people like 5 times they've come to the presentation. There is a lot of stuff. So we'll kind of go through that. But again, this is not how I'm just going to talk to you guys. This is kind of a discussion. Let's talk about glue. If you've got questions, raise your hand. It's always more fun to hear some of those. I always like the questions because if I can't answer them, usually we'll go back to the lab and we'll test. And so since the last time we've had some new testing come out, so we'll present some of that. So I manage a group. We have 2 people who do testing in the lab, and then we have our 800 number. So everybody has got my business card. It's on the bottle, 1-800-347-4583. My business card goes out to a lot of people. So if you call that number, ask for Bob. I'm the only Bob. And some cases, if somebody's on vacation, I'm actually working the phones and asking the questions. So I enjoy that. It's fun to talk to you guys. Right now, next week, I'll be at Mark Adams School of Woodworking. Anybody been there? I am working on my fellowship project at this point in time, so hopefully I'll finish that this year. So let's get kind of started. We do have a bunch of different glues, flooring products and stuff, but today we're going to talk about wood glues. If you've got questions about any of the other types of glues, I'm more than happy to answer those questions. Maybe Franklin doesn't make them, but I've worked for other companies who have made glues, so I can maybe point you in the correct direction. But wood is a wonderful substrate, right? It's easy to work, and most of all, it's a beautiful substrate, right? I mean, it's just the different types of woods and how we put them together and the projects that we work on. But the issue comes in is there are certain properties of wood that we have to be cognizant of, right? So wood is not consistent in most cases. One of the things that we'll first talk about is density, right? So normally, and this will be at least once a week, I'll get a call. And the call goes, I need your strongest wood glue, what do you got? And so because I like to talk about what you guys are doing, so I asked the guy, I said, so what are you doing? He says, well, I'm making model airplanes. And so my statement back to him was, you really don't need my strongest wood glue. You need only something that will work to the strength of the balsa wood, which is about 40 to 70 psi, right? And so our wood glues will go up to 4,100 psi. That's our strongest wood glue. So when I talk about strength, right, we look at it a little bit differently from the glue side, right? So you're looking at it from the wood side, you're looking at it from your project side. I'm looking at it from the glue side, right? So when we look at glue, we have substrate A and its strength. Then we have the interface between the substrate and the glue itself, which is the adhesion portion, right? How strongly it holds to that substrate. Then we actually have the strength of the glue itself, right? And then you have the adhesion to substrate B, and then you have substrate B. I only need, from the glue side, to be stronger than the weakest link in the chain. So we also make drywall adhesives, right? So people say, well, you know, I need your really strong adhesive. Well, this is Douglas fir to drywall. How strong do I have to be? I only have to be as strong as the paper on the drywall, which is about, well, the test, there's an ASTM test, which says you need to be 40 psi. Well, it's hard to find drywall now that actually breaks at 40 psi because the paper's much cheaper. And so, again, when we're looking at these substrates, when we're looking at your project, when we're looking at your joinery, right, we're looking at, well, how strong does the glue have to be? And we'll kind of go through some of that in the other slides. The other thing is moisture content, right? So if you're using a water-based wood glue, there will be a point where the glue won't dry. And that's usually around 17% moisture content. And normally we'll get calls. We know when it's raining in California because people will call us and go, and usually it starts with, your glue sucks. And then well, can you tell me a little bit more about it? And so usually we know when it's raining in California because we get lots of calls. And the calls will be like, your glue's not drying. And we're like, well, if you figured out how to keep water from evaporating, and it's dry outside, the Saudi Arabians would love to figure out how to do that. So we're going to be filthy rich, right? So, but it really isn't that. So if your glue isn't drying, typically there are reasons for it, right? The laws of physics state that things go from high concentrations and go to low concentrations, right? And so if the glue can't get from point A to point B, that means either the humidity is so high that it can't dry, or the wood is so wet that it can't evaporate out, that it's not soaking into the wood, et cetera, right? So there's a reason for that. So if you're running into situations where you're finding, you know, normally my pieces will dry within a day or so, but I'm finding Type on 3 is still wet after 4 days. And it's usually because it's been raining for a long time, and that's normally what we find. So just kind of keep an idea of that. So when I'm giving you information on strength, working time, and all of that, we run our laboratory tests. Right? The ASTM strength test is ASTM D905. It allows us 1 week of drying time before we pull them. So all of the strengths that I'm going to give you is after a week of drying. And it's also at 8% moisture content, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 50% relative humidity. So if your conditions in your lab are different from that, then you're going to note that there's going to be differences from what I tell you or what our literature states. And so if say you're in Phoenix and the wood moisture content is maybe 3 to 5%, the Type on 2 may only give you 1 minute of working time versus the 5 minutes and another 5 to get all your stuff together. Now, if you're in Seattle and it's been raining since October, and now it is January, it may take you may get working time of 30 to 40 minutes. And so it's going to be different. And so you'll raise your hand and you ask me questions, I may have to answer, I don't know, because I don't know the conditions that you're working in. But note that everything that I say, 8% moisture content, 50% relative humidity, 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the other thing with wood is it does not change dimensions equally, right? So a tree from the roots to the top of the tree, in terms of moisture changes and dimensional changes, it doesn't move very much at all. And so we can really almost forget about it, right? But then when we go from the middle of the tree to the bark, that's called the radial dimension, and that will shrink by X. And X is going to be different for every species of tree. Now, if I've got poplar that is grown down south and I've got poplar that's grown up north, that may have a different X or dimensional change. And then when we look at the tangential direction, which is around the bark itself, it's about 2X. And so in that, if you see a kind of a log drying on the side of the road, right, you're going to see that it cracks this way, right? Because the crack, basically it's drying faster around the outside than it's shrinking on the inside. And so that's why you'll see it crack. And wood is going to move. Changes in moisture content, the wood will move. It's up to us, when we're working on our projects, to determine how to make that work for us and not against us. So one of the things that we see, and this is more that we see for tabletops, right? So I'm looking at a tabletop here. If I use boards on the outside, which are lower moisture contents, the one in the middle, eventually that piece will, what we call equilibrate, right? So it's all going to get to the same moisture content. And what that means is the board in the middle is going to shrink more than the ones on the outside. And so, and I don't know if you guys have ever seen that, you look at a table and you see some, it just kind of steps down a little bit, right? Now, this can be a little bit different also in terms of if it is quarter sawn or plain sawn, right? So the boards you see that are up there now are plain sawn. And so, remember we said the radial direction versus the tangential direction, right? So in this particular case, the tangential direction is this way, and so the boards, because they have more tangential direction on the opposite side, they will tend to cup opposite of the, so in this particular case, that table, you may also see a ripple as you go down, as it changes, right? Now, if they were quarter sawn, where the grain was up and down, that would all be in the tangential direction, and therefore, thickness will change more than it is in width. So we want to be cognizant of that. The other thing that we usually will get a couple of calls for is what are called sunken glue joints. Now, normally the call will start off with, your glue is extruding from the glue line. And my statement is, oh, really? Well, how do you know that? And they said, well, I'm rubbing my finger on the joint where the wood is, where the joint is, and I can feel a ridge. And so my statement back to him, and I'm going to play with you a little bit if you call, and you get me. And I apologize if one of those of you guys have been one of those people. But my first statement back to you is, so everybody here has had dried wood glue, right? It's a very hard plastic. Agree or disagree? Agree. Now, I'm going to ask the guy, so let me get this straight. So you've gotten hard wood glue, a hard plastic, to extrude from a wood glue. How much pressure do you have on there? And usually you hear him go, well, it's a table. I don't have any clamping pressure on it. Oh, well, okay. So let me get this straight. So you got a wood glue to extrude from a glue line with no pressure on it. You violated the laws of physics, and we're going to be filthy rich, right? So you can't, right? So the glue is not extruding from the glue line unless you got a lot of pressure on it. What happens in this particular case is when you glue up with a water-based wood glue, the wood will swell, right? It grows. if I sand it off before that glue has had a chance to dry or equilibrate, what I will happen is I will form a line across the top. Unfortunately, my glue doesn't expand and contract with temperature unless I'm using high glue. High glue will expand and contract similarly to wood with moisture. As a matter of fact, with high glue, you can make a hygrometer for your shop. Basically, you just take some high glue, put it on a piece of paper, let it dry, and that paper, as it dries, it will shrink and curl that paper up into a tight roll. When the humidity goes up, that roll will unfold. And so by that unfolding, you can tell how humid it is in your shop. I have one on my bulletin board, and the HVAC system went out like it was about 5 years ago now. And it got so humid that it actually re-liquefied and dripped onto the carpet. So that's really the issue with high glue is, and the reason it's not used a lot is because humidity-wise, it's not resistant to humidity, right? And so, but the PVAs don't care what the humidity is, and so has much better resistance to that. The other thing then that can happen, right? So the glue lines, one way to tell is just put a straight edge across there, shine a flashlight back behind. If you see a little valley in between, this is what has occurred. Now the other thing that can occur, and this is just normal, and normally we will see this more. Remember we talked about quarter sawn wood where the grain is up and down? And so it shrinks more in thickness than it does in width. And so we'll see this more on that. This is just a natural portion, and we'll see this usually in areas where it gets really cold, and that's not here, right? And then areas where it gets really hot and humid, again, not here, right? So what can happen is, and this is natural over time, right? So as the humidity goes up, the wood's going to swell. Then in the winter, when you're trying to heat minus 10 air in your house, humidity goes way down and the wood will shrink. And then you'll be able to start feeling some ridges, right? Now, this can get so bad, and this was a guy from California. He's an artist who made a table. He sold it for $45,000. I wish I knew who his clientele was. He sold the table to them in Phoenix. So what happened is the wood shrank so badly that the finish got pulled right off of the surface. And you had white lines down the whole table. Of course, the call started with my glue sucked. But we have to talk about that, right? So again, these are things that you need to know. So how I told the guy, I said was, listen, once you understand what's going on, now you can talk to your customer and say, listen, you're going to have to put some humidity in your house to keep this at an even humidity. And if you don't, this is what's going to occur. So that then when it does occur, you're the goat. But if you don't tell them, right, goat being greatest of all time, right? But if you don't tell them and it occurs, then you're going to be the goat, which is the, right? So again, understanding what's going on, understanding the wood, understanding what the glue does, understanding all of this stuff can make you a better woodworker. Anybody here segment wood turn? Okay? So you've run into this all the time, right? So you come in and you do your final sand, right? And I don't know if you guys do some segmented turning, because that feel, right? That feel that you get, right, when you do that final sand, and it's just, there's a feel, right? And so then you take it off and you put it to the side and you come back a couple of days and you go, hey, feel this. This is really good. And you feel it, and you can feel every single glue line on that piece, right? Because as it equilibrates back, right, now the wood is shrinking and you can feel those joints. So these things occur, and you've got to understand. So how do I get rid of that? Drying it to the fullest that it's ever going to see in terms of dryness, and then doing your final sand. So when it then swells from there, your finger can't feel a divot, but your finger can feel 2/1000 of an inch ridge. 2/1000 of an inch. So your fingers are very sensitive for that, but not for the dips. And so it's okay if you just get it as dry as possible. In other words, is if you want to keep that seasonal thing from occurring, keep your shop dry and then do your sanding then. Or you just have to understand that these things will occur seasonally and it's okay. It's wood. It's a natural product. This is why we love wood, right? It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. But it's got some properties that you have to understand and learn to control. And that's why breadboards, right? We have to leave, if we're making a breadboard, the ability for that table to expand this way without cracking that end board, right? Because that end board is in a different direction and it's not going to expand and contract like the other piece of wood, right? Make sense? All right. The other thing we have to talk about is the extractives, right? This is the other stuff in wood, right? And so trees will produce oils, tannic acids, other chemicals, which is their immune system, right? So let's say a tree's growing in the forest and it's happy, it's got sunlight, and termites move into the neighborhood. The tree can't go, well, there goes the forest, and move to another forest, right? So it's got to battle, right? So it's chemical warfare is basically what it is, right? So the oil that is in tropicals are typically there, plugs the stomachs, intestines of the termites so they can't digest the wood. And so then the question comes, well, why am I having to remove the oil? How does wood glues work, right? So who here believes that wood glues bond through the pores of the wood? Who here believes that wood glues bond some other way? Well, let me ask you a question. If they bonded through the pores of the wood, what would be your strongest bond? End grain to end grain would be your strongest bond. It's got tons of pores, right? And especially oak would then be stronger than maple, and right? And it's not. End grain tends to be very weak. And the reason it tends to be weak is because it has less cellulose. So I'm a chemist, so I'm going to have to go through a little bit of chemistry. I'll try and keep it light because it, the back room will fall asleep first, and then, yeah. So this is it. This is cellulose, right? So cellulose is glucose. Each one of those separate rings is a glucose molecule. It's sugar, right? I mean sugar. The plant, sunlight, carbon dioxide, water, will produce this glucose molecule. It's a sugar, and then the tree polymerizes it together into long chains to about, well, let's say 2,000. Now, on each chain, we see an oxygen-hydrogen kind of sticking off. This is what's important. The oxygen loves electrons, so it's going to pull electrons toward it. The hydrogens are ambivalent to electrons, and they're like, go ahead, you can have it. But what that does, and this is really what makes wood gluing so strong, is that oxygen pulls electrons and gives it a net negative charge. The hydrogen gets a net positive charge, just like a atomic neodymium magnet, right? So let's think about it. You take a small neodymium magnet and put it on your fridge, right? You pull it off pretty easy, but I mean, it's a little difficult to pull off. Now, there's 3 on each molecule. Let's call it 2,000 because it makes the math easier. So then I have 1 molecule of cellulose. So what I'm going to do is then put 6,000 neodymium magnets on my refrigerator and try to pull them off all at the same time. What's going to happen? I'll pull the door off. And this is what occurs with wood. Now, somebody came up to me and said, in one of these presentations, they said, all right, I understand that. I can understand the cellulose. I can understand the hydrogen bonding where they want to nest together and the oxygens attach the hydrogen. And the wood glues that we make have polyvinyl alcohol, which has a lot of hydroxyl groups in it. So the glue has a lot of what the cellulose has, which is the hydroxyl groups. So that's what bonds it. So one of the people said, okay, I understand that. But the wood pores have to have some portion of strength to it. Just has to. So I thought about it for a while, and I was like, how am I going to test that? How am I going to test that? And so I'm thinking about it, and the guy who invented Type Bond 2, Chuck, he comes in, he's retired. He comes in because he's bored at home, right? So he was walking down the hall. I said, Chuck, come here. And Chuck goes, what do you need? I said, Chuck, can you make me Type Bond 2 without the hydroxyl groups? And Chuck's kind of one of those eccentric kind of guys. So he kind of looks at the ceiling and just kind of wanders out of my office. And I was like, Chuck? So anyway, so I didn't think much of it. Chuck's an interesting guy. 2 years later, he comes in my office with and it's a quart bottle, and he puts it on my desk. Sorry, a couple of these caps were broken. So he puts the quart bottle on my desk, and he goes, hey, Chuck, how you doing? What's that? He goes, it's what you asked me for. And I'm like, you guys are, you're like me, what? I couldn't remember what I asked you for yesterday, right? And so I said, well, what did I ask you for, Chuck? He goes, Type Bond 2 without the hydroxyl groups. I said, great. So we tested it, right? So the first thing that we looked at was particle size. So the particle size on this was smaller. So if it was pore bonding, it should be deeper into the pores, and so it should be a stronger bond. But what we found was the opposite of that. So when we bonded the stuff without the hydroxyl groups, we got 800 psi. So basically what we do is we glue blocks together, and then we shear the blocks apart on a machine that measures the strength. The ones with the hydroxyl groups, we got 4,000 psi. So we know that pore bonding maximum is going to be about 20%. But the one thing that I forgot was that, and Chuck reminded me of that when I showed him the research on it. He said, yeah, but it's less than that. And I said, well, what do you mean? Oh, well, the strength's going to be less than that. I said, why? He said, well, Type Bond 2 has, and I'm sorry, this N-methylolacrylamide. Let me just write that down. That's part of the formula. Excuse me. And so I said, why does that matter? He goes, well, the N-methylolacrylamide reacts with the hydroxyl groups, and that's what gives it its water resistance. And I was like, so it can react with the wood's hydroxyl groups too, which is kind of like having polyvinyl alcohol. And there goes, yeah, why would you ask? So anyway, I said, well, we're going to need probably Type Bond original without the hydroxyl groups. And he was like, well, probably not going to do that. That's not my formula. So the guy who did Type Bond original, he's already passed away. So at this point, I probably won't. But with discussions with Chuck, the assumption is probably around 5, maybe 10% that you would get some pore bonding in top of that. So it makes sense now if you look at bonding, why you have to remove the oils, right? So the oil is there to protect the cellulose so the bugs won't eat it as a food source. Then there's all the tannic acids and all of that. The other thing is, if you've ever tried to bond laser cut edges, you would find that they don't bond very well either. Well, laser cut edges chars the wood, and as you char the wood, it removes the hydroxyl groups. So you end up with just the carbon instead of with the hydroxyl groups, which is what comes off with the heat. And so in that particular case, it now makes sense, right? The more cellulose you have, the stronger the bond. And if we look at all of the fancy joinery out there, what does the fancy joinery do? It increases that edge grain, the cellulose to cellulose connections to get a stronger bond. Once you understand that, right, now we can make better decisions on, is this going to be a strong bond? Is there enough fiber to fiber contact, cellulose to cellulose, to get that hydrogen bonding? Questions at this point? Okay, the other thing, and sometimes this pops up and sometimes it doesn't. No, it's not going to pop up. It's a picture. I think if I, let's see, I think I can grab this and pull it over this way or this way. Yeah, there we go. So in this particular case, black glue lines. I don't know if anybody's ever run into that. Usually, iron is the issue, right? So some oak trees typically will get calls on oak. Oak will pick up iron from the soil, and then when it comes in contact with the polyvinyl alcohol or polyvinyl acetate, usually polyvinyl acetate will hydrolyze and it gives off a little bit of acetic acid. Has anybody here made a black dye with steel wool and vinegar? Okay, so this is what's occurring. It's iron acetate. It's a very dark purple color is actually what it is. And so your glue lines. This happens when glue hits pipe clamps, the iron on the pipe clamps. It's that iron acetate, and it's a soluble salt, so it goes very deep into the wood. And so it can be very difficult to remove, but that's what's going on. And it's very similar to if you get black glue lines. I know we had a guy from Canada call, and he was using maple, and he was getting black glue lines. And we typically never see black glue lines with maple. And so we talked about an hour, and we eventually found that he had gotten some rust on his table saw, and had taken the sandpaper and then used that sandpaper to sand the maple. So the iron's going to come from somewhere. And that's where it is. Now, recently, we did get somebody who sent in some joints that were turning red. The glue lines were turning red. And what we found on that, it was the species of wood that he was using. So most of the wood glues will have kind of an acidic, it's got a low pH. And so with this particular species, if you soak it in acid, you can get a red dye. And so it was actually producing this red dye, which would causing the glue lines to turn red. Recently, we just got one with pine with the red glue lines. I'm assuming pine isn't one where it makes a dye, but when he put a finish on it, one of the finishes, it turned the glue lines red. So we're going to try and figure out what that is. That's in the lab right now. So again, we get stuff all the time, and we're more than happy to figure it out if you guys come into that. I've heard of green glue lines. I'm assuming it's copper, but the guy who called and said that he didn't send the samples in, so we couldn't test them. So if you guys ever run into green glue lines, send them in. Black, we already know what that is. So, all right. So I am going to have to, since I won't be able to see it, close it from here. There we go. And now I can bring it back. All right. Questions at this point in time? Okay, so now we're going to go into some of the gluing applications, right? And so the easiest glue-ups, the strongest glue-ups are going to be your face-to-face, edge-to-edge gluing, right? So, but then we have to clamp. So the objective of clamping is to get your pieces into the position you want them to be in when the glue dries, right? So typically you're going to look where the clamp hits the wood. You're going to get what's called a cone of force, right? And the cone of force, you can kind of think of it as 45 degrees in each direction, right? 90-degree angle. And they need to overlap, right? Stiffer the wood, the wider that angle. The softer the wood, the steeper the angle on that arch, or the cone of force. Now, one of the quick ones we can look at is, well, let's say I put a veneer on top of a piece and then try and clamp it like I did the other pieces, right? So where that does not overlap, that veneer can have a tendency to bubble, right? So to keep that from occurring, we would put a caul on top of there, or we would use a vacuum bag to spread that force over the top, right? So then the question comes in is, well, vacuum bag, what's the maximum clamping pressure on that? It's going to be about, what, 14 psi, right? At sea level. You go higher, it's going to be less than that. And so what is the correct clamping force? Well, we had a guy call, he was gluing up Jatoba, and his joints were coming apart. And so we we talked through it. Did he wipe it with acetone, right, to clean, get to the good cellulose? He did everything correctly. And so I asked him, could you send me in some samples? So in discussions with the, how do you say, I can't say the older cadre of people, but because I'm getting there. But the people who have been with Franklin longer said, well, you can go all the way up to 1,000 PSI without losing any strength. And I was like, they said, we have the paper. So they sent me the paper. It came out in 1998, some wood science guy. It took me about 3 months to read it because, you know, you do 2 paragraphs and then you read 2 more paragraphs, and it was really dull and boring. But he showed it was. And so we wanted to do some testing. So we took the Jatoba, we took maple, so the Jatoba hard, maple medium density, and then we took poplar as a low density wood. And we glued them at 3 different clamping pressures. One is where we took just a 5-pound weight and we put it on top of the piece. Worked out to be 0.6 psi. Then we used our recommended clamping forces, which are about 100 psi for softwoods, 150 for medium density, and 200 psi for high density woods. And then we took it in a carver press and went all the way up to 1,000 psi, like the paper said. In every single instance, the 0.6 psi gave the strong response. Now, it differed how much strength you lost based on the hardness of the wood. So the poplar, we lost about 10% of the strength, right? With the maple, we lost about 20 to 25. With the Jatoba, we lost 50 to 100%. In some cases, as we took it out of the carver press, they just came apart. So we couldn't even test the strength. And so we've kind of changed our recommendations for clamping pressure now. And it's a little bit of a long sentence, and it doesn't fit on the bottle because it's already an eye chart, right? So the statement is, use the least amount of clamping pressure you need to get your pieces into the position you want them to be in when the glue dries. So that's it. If you don't need clamping pressure, you don't need clamping pressure. To prove that, my fellowship project, I'm making a desk. And with this desk, I have pieces of wood that we use from cutoffs, some of the testing that we have done for subfloor. And so I have Douglas fir, and I have just taken those pieces and made an arc of that, and then with sides on that. And I have glued those together without any clamping pressure. And that desk is very strong. I know a lot of people are jumping on top of it and stuff, and it's perfect. Now, the other thing, though, is, remember, you're putting a water-based wood glue on one piece of wood, on one side of wood, and what's that going to do? Well, it's going to cause that wood to swell. So it's going to want to move on you, right? So you got to be cognizant of that. These pieces were relatively small, and so the movement wasn't big enough to cause issues. But then you have to look at, okay, I got to get it square, and depending on how poor your joinery is, don't ask me why I know this, you may have to put a little bit more force on it to get it into square, right? And so what our recommendation is, when you go to clamp, not a little is good, but more is better. It's actually the opposite of that. But you got to put enough pressure on to get your pieces to come together, right? And if you're looking at invisible glue lines, there's going to be a little bit more pressure. And in most cases, you can lose that 20% strength even on maple and oak, because how much stress is on a tabletop, right? So kind of look at that, right? What does the glue have to do? What is the stresses that is going to be under? So don't sweat it. I'm not here to change anything that you guys are doing. That's not my goal at all. My goal is to explain what can occur so that you don't quickly go, it's got to be the glue, there's that 800 number, and you tell me my glue sucks, right? So this is why we have these presentations. It's an outreach to the woodworkers. When I first started with the company, we used to get 1,500 calls a month, and half of those were problems with woodworking. So I put together this presentation and started giving it to Mark Adams, and it was well read. And then people with wood guilds were going, hey, can you give that to our group and all that? And so this is where it is. And now I give about 12 to 15 a year, go around and give this presentation. But our goal is to make sure that everybody understands what gluing is and understands what your part of that process is, right? Questions at this point?
I'm a little blown away. So you're saying a joint could fail because you use too much pressure?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and we actually do see that. Now, most of the problems come in, and we'll kind of go through this on the drying of the adhesive, but most of the problems come in as we still get them is because they go past the open time of the adhesive. But yeah, it's difficult, right? Because unless you're using really hard wood, you're never going to get 100% reduction in strength, but you can weaken it, right? And so in a lot of cases, if your board has a crown on it, right, and then you're clamping it to get the kind of the crown together, the end pieces can get under a lot of pressure, right? And then you're clamping them in addition to that. And then you go to cut that end off, and it hits the floor, and the boards they hit the floor, and they separate at the glue lines. That's typically because of a lot of pressure that you can see on some of those end boards. Make sense? Question?
Will a glue joint ever age out? Like, for example, antique, you see, a glue joint ever age out? For example, you have an antique,
Yeah.
The joints come loose. Will they ever loosen up?
So at this point in time, no. So the PVAs have been out since the 50s. We have not heard of any joints deteriorating like we do with hide glue. Now, hide glue is a natural product, and bacteria have evolved to utilize that as a food source. Bacteria at this point have not been, evolved to utilize plastic as a food source. However, and I caution all you scientists out there who are developing bacteria that will degrade plastics. If that ever occurs, if that gets out in the wild, then yes. Chances are if you get enough moisture content of there where the bacteria can live and start breaking down, then the plastics will go away too. That also includes your car. It also includes your house, right? So I caution these people that it's probably not a good idea to get bacteria to break down plastics. It's just probably not something that we're going to get used to. But yes, hide glues, moisture content of the wood gets up. I think it's about, 28% or 22% is where fungus can start growing in the wood. So, and that basically hide glue is gravy. Everybody here has made hide glue. And you're going to look at me and go, I've never made hide glue. And I'm going to say, yes, you have. Raise your hand if you've had Kentucky Fried Chicken. Come on, I know you guys all have. Raise your hand if you've grabbed a napkin and tried to wipe it off and the napkin stuck to your fingers. Now raise your hand. Chicken hide glue. Okay, so it's just the collagen. It's the water-soluble portion of collagen under the skin. Chickens have it. You can get it. There's bunny hide glue. A lot of the guys who do gilding, like rabbit hide glue better than cow hide glue. We use a cow hide basically for ours. It's
Well, it's a simple explanation to the pressure that you have to. If overpressure, you squeeze all the glue out, there's nothing there to bond.
Yeah, so the question is why do you get a weaker joint? Is it because you're squeezing all the glue out of the joint? We feel it is the case because it makes sense. If you look at a softer wood, as you squeeze it, the wood will crush under that hydraulic pressure. Whereas as you get harder and harder, that wood tends to not crush and give a space for the glue to be in, and so you squeeze it out. And similar to sealants, right? If I've got a gap and I put sealant in and the gap is big enough for the movement, the sealant will work. But if the gap is too small and I have that same amount of movement, the sealant cannot stretch as far, and so it'll tend to break, right? So sealant is, a lot of people don't understand sealants is the wider the gap, the better. But they look ugly and everybody wants the small gap, but then chances of failure are higher. So what we have found on what we think is, if you don't get enough glue to allow for the natural movement of the wood with moisture content, you put too much stress on that and it tends to pop that glue line, right? Because you don't get much movement.
Bob, so Dennis, who's from West Virginia watching online, wants to know, is there a difference when gluing air-dried versus kiln-dried wood? Can you glue air-dried to kiln-dried?
So what we have found is, in terms of gluing things with different moisture content, you really need to be within 1% moisture content. So whether it's air-dried or whether it's kiln-dried, you really, air-dried typically is going to leave it about 10%. Normally kiln-dried could get it down to 8 in a lot of cases, especially if you're making picture frames. So if I've got different, how do you say, rails and stiles. So if I've got a rail and stile board, what's going to happen is this is going to shrink this way, this is going to shrink this way, and the differential will cause that to split. So you'll get splits on the lines because of that excess movement, right? So if they're both the same, usually we don't find a problem. We have seen problems at 1%, but they're rare. So usually it's you got to look at the grain direction, right? Tangential moves more than the radial direction does. And so you got to look at that a little bit and see which one is moving more. If you want to not have any problems, we see about half a percentage moisture content difference is what you need. So we do a lot of, cabinet shop guys. And we see it all the time. So they'll send us stuff in, we'll do a moisture content check on each piece, and we'll find that they're about 1.5% differential, and we'll see the cracking. So.
What glue would you use for a temporary glue?
So for a temporary glue,
Something you want to take apart later on.
so in a lot of cases, high glue tends to be very good for that because you can use humidity, so a little bit of steam will take something right apart. CA glues are used turning for holding on to the, the metal piece because they're very brittle. So you can hit the metal piece with a ball peen hammer and it'll shatter the glue and sometimes it'll release. But what I will tell you is most glues are designed to be permanent. I mean, that's the whole idea of it, right? And so therefore,
Think about that. On turning, you have two pieces or more than two pieces of wood that you want to separate after you get things turned.
yeah, what I've seen people do is just glue paper between them, right? And then,
Any kind of glue with the paper?
yeah, I mean, usually a white glue or even a high glue, because you put a bit of, what you do is if you put a little water on the paper, that paper will soak up that water very quickly, right? And then it'll come apart much easier, so to speak, because the wood fibers will just soak that water up without having to get the wood very, very wet. So you can concentrate on just putting that on there. But yeah, I've seen where you can do that. But there's really, if we made a temporary glue, people would not like it. Right? And so most of the glue people out there are making glues that are supposed to hold things together permanently, right? So that when your furniture ends up in a pyramid 2,000 years later, it's still looking pretty good, right? Questions? All right. So let's get into the fun part, which is the drying of adhesives, right? So this is actually what Type 1 Original looks like under a microscope. They're just microscopic balls of plastic that float in water. That's it. It's not rocket science. That's all it is, right? So the drying process, they're far apart. They get closer and closer and closer together till they touch. Everybody's rubbed wood glue between their fingers. Very slippery. And then all of a sudden it kind of, what I call putties up, right? So if you took that glue that has puttied up and rubbed it on some wood, put the glue together and put two pieces together, you would not get a good bond. And the reason for that is the glue has to flow, okay? Remember, we're talking about the hydroxyl groups on the wood, hydroxyl groups on the particles. So the particles have to flow and get close to the cellulose, right? Kind of like, we'll go back to the analogy of the magnets, right? So if I put a magnet on the fridge, but I put it between two pieces of construction paper, right? Can I pull it off a lot easier? Yeah. So the closer they can get, the closer that they bond together, the stronger the bonds get. So the glue has to be able to flow. If it can't flow, then it won't get, how do you say, a close association with those hydroxyl groups. So where is that, right? So where does the particle start to touch? Well, if I've got a jar full of marbles, I can still add a third of the volume in water, right? So about 67% solids, right? Then they're going to start to touch. Most of the wood glues are about 50% solids, type 1 original, type 1 2, type 1 3, 50% solids. And so you got 17% water to play with. Remember, if the wood's so, right, because when you put glue on, everybody's put glue on, and it's gotten draggy right away, right? So then you got to put more on because the wood is sucking the moisture out of the glue. So this particular product, which is the Quick and Thick, right? It's quick because this is 60% solids instead of 50%. So you only have 7% moisture to play with on that before it starts to want to set, right? Now, when I say start to set, which is that kind of where it kind of gels. I don't know if you've ever used hot high glue. Hot high glue gels when it cools off, right? So it turns kind of like gravy. It's actually gravy. So when you put it in the fridge, right, gel comes down and then it gels, right? As the gravy sits on the table and cools off, starts to gel. It's the same thing that high glue does, right? And that gelling itself will cause it to get a little bit more strength, right? Now, it's the same with the water-based wood glues, right? You put them on two pieces, you can do a rub joint. I don't know if anybody knows what a rub joint is, right? So you put the glue on and you rub it until you feel it kind of set. And then if you set it off to the side, right, no clamping pressure, as long as the pieces don't want to twist, that will give you a very strong bond. And so it makes sense now, right, that this is what's going on with the glue. So to help everybody out, we will give you what's called open time and then what's called a total assembly time. So during the open time is where you put the glue on, the air is evaporating water out of the glue, and the wood is sucking the moisture out of the glue, right? So we have glues. So PVAs, which are kind of white glues are like school glue. They tend to give you that very long open time, very slippery for long periods of time, and they don't set very fast. Most of the people who use wood glues don't like that and want something that will set relatively fast, because otherwise they stay slippery. You put them in the clamps and they're sliding all over the place. And so we can add chemicals to that to help them to set faster. We can put chemicals in there that will help them set slower. So Type 1 Original and Type 1 2 were made as production adhesives, right? Time is money in the woodworking industry, and it's got a five-minute open time, and then you got 5 minutes to get it back in the clamps. Most of your production guys, they're getting them together within 2 minutes. In a lot of cases with Type 1, so the faster they set, the faster they will also gain strength. And so in those cases, I've seen production guys who, and their wood is pretty straight grained, so it doesn't want to warp and twist. But they're taking it out of the clamps within 7 minutes. But you know, you set it aside. You can't machine them. The wood is the glue's relatively weak yet, but it has set enough, right? So Type 1 Original and 2, after about, you know, we say 30 minutes clamp time, but after 15 minutes, you're up around 20% strength. So 20% of say 4,000, right? You're already up around 1,600 psi. 800, which is, you're getting to be about the strength of poplar at that point in time, right? Now, Type 1 3, which is designed to have longer working time, right? It's got a 10-minute open time, 20 to 25 minutes to get your pieces together. And we had, at this point, we've changed over, I don't know if anybody's noticed Type on 3's color changed a little bit recently. Used to have a kind of a browner color, now it's a little bit lighter. We used to use walnut shell flour. So the wood flours or the walnut shell flour would plug the pores of the wood so that the wood wouldn't suck the water out of the glue as fast. So that's what gave you your longer working time. We have extend versions of original and 2, and we use clay typically for those instead of the walnut shell flour. The walnut shell flour, though, over time, depending on the season, some seasons the shell flour would have a higher density, some would have a lower density, so some of the bottles you would see had the brown stuff floating on the top, and then sometimes it would have the brown stuff on the bottom. And so we changed to a maple flour, and the maple flour has a much more, the density is more even from season to season. So if you've seen that it's lightened up, it's because we've changed the type of flour that's added to it, but it's still the same formulation, right? So then total assembly time is that time that you got to get them in the clamps, or what will happen is, as that glue is puttied up, if you pull it apart at that point, it can't flow back together, right? The particles can't slide past each other. And so what happens is you'll get a layer of air in the glue line. And so that air is going to keep the particles from coming together, or more of those particles coming together, so your glue line will always be weaker. How much weaker? It's going to depend on how far past you're past that glue line. I mean, how good can that flow? Because you're going to be squeezing it a little bit, which is going to squeeze the particles together. But if you've got air in there, it can't get the air out because it can't flow in and release the air. Okay? So then the question comes in is, all right, one-sided gluing or two-sided gluing? Everybody who is a two-sided gluer, raise your hand. Everybody who's a single-sided gluer, raise your hand. Everybody is correct. Now, there's advantages and disadvantages to each one, right? So if you want invisible glue lines, and this table does not have them. If you want invisible glue lines, you have to be a single-sided gluer. Why is that? Well, because remember when we said we put the glue on, the wood is going to suck the moisture, I am forming a glue line as soon as that glue hits the wood. If I do it on both sides, my glue lines are always going to be twice as thick. Right? Now, the problem with being a single-sided gluer is the wood is sucking the moisture out, air is evaporating out of there, and that glue is going to set very, very quickly. And so you really need to follow those and have a timer to make sure that you're getting them together quickly. The one glue that we have the most calls of failure on is Type on 2. Type on 2 sets really, really quick. Now this will set twice as quick, but we actually tell you that on there, that it's quick and thick. And so you know it's supposed to set quick, right? That's the whole reason for that. But Type on 2 sets almost as fast as this. This will set probably twice as fast, but okay, 3 minutes versus a minute and a half. Okay, not a lot of time differential, right? And so Type on 2 sets really fast, and we'll get a lot of them where, you'll see some bonds, right? So some guy sent me a piece. He said, your glue sucks. It's not working. So I said, well, send me the pieces. We'll look at them. So he sent it in. It was a newel post, and the first bond came right apart, right, when we saw it. And we found that he had glue on one side, but he was a single-sided gluer. But the glue had dried before he got the pieces together. There was no transfer to that other side. The next piece also came apart, but we saw more fiber tear on that, so he got some of it together while there were some areas still good. Now, the third glue bond we couldn't get apart. And when I called him back, I said, listen, it's a problem with the open time. It's what you did. He goes, no, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never had a problem, except for this time. And when you say that to me, I know, well, you can never tell the truth, and so you probably never improve. But anyway, so I said, listen, the one glue line I couldn't get apart. Did you find that? He goes, yeah. I said, well, my glue is not smart enough to play tricks on you. Right? My glue isn't going to go, listen, let's play a joke on him. We're not going to bond here, but we'll bond here. Right? So it can't. So what I'm going to, normally when I call you on the phone, I'm going to tell you, well, just take some scrap pieces of wood that you have and glue them together. And the reason I say scrap pieces is because you're gluing just one piece together. You're going to get it together within the time frame of whatever glue you're using. And just clamp it for 24 hours, then after 24 hours, take it and break it with a hammer. If you get wood failure, it's not the glue. And so he did that, and he called me back. He said, okay, I apologize. So he did learn something, so that's good. Now, the other thing that you want to look at, being a two-sided gluer, you're going to get more time, right? Your glue line's going to be twice as thick, but that's okay. You can make, if you want, you can put a dye in there. You can dye them any color you want. You can have black glue lines, red glue lines, purple glue lines, whatever you want. And the thicker you make them, you can get them to look like a veneer that you've stuck in between each one. And you did, wow, that's really good work, when it's really just thick glue lines. So the problem, though, is you're going to use twice as much glue. We thank you for that. The other problem, though, is you're also going to get a lot of squeeze out, right? And squeeze out can be a pain in the butt to deal with, right? And so best way to get squeeze out up is actually you take a wet cloth and you just kind of scrape it up off the surface, get the glue, most of the bulk glue off, and then make sure you use a clean rag, clean water, and then you just wash it off the surface. That tends to work the best. You get a grain raise, but it sands off very, very quickly. Normally what we'll say is wait 20 minutes till it putties up, till it's still rubbery, and then you can take this handy-dandy brush that I've given you guys. It's got a scraper on the end, and that scraper works pretty well to get that up. It's also flared, unlike our competitors' product out there. This can get into corners, where our competitors, which go in, you can't get it in the corners. So anyway. But usually if you wait 20 minutes, you've gotten past that putty point, right? So this is key. So if I'm scraping the glue off, it may look like it's getting all over the place, but it's past the putty point, so it's just rolling on the surface. Very easily sanded off. Okay? Questions? No questions. All right. Oh, over here. Sorry.
This might be getting ahead of things. How does that affect staining and finishing and things like that?
So the reason you do the water wash is to get those particles, right? So if you got to pull the particles up off the surface, right? Because you don't want to be shoving them down into the wood while the glue is wet, right? Because yes, then you'll have an issue. So we tested it on walnut, and we did that water wash. And it was really just 50 seconds of sanding before you got, and we used mineral spirits to see if it was stainable, and it was fine. It was fine. So again, whatever process that you use at this point in time, and it works for you, it's great. Don't change. But if you're finding some difficulty doing stuff, it's fine. You can use some water, right? Other question?
You mentioned that the glue can be a little slippery when you first apply it. I've seen some people recommend adding like sand or some other grit to the glue line to give you a little bit more control over it. Does that affect the strength at all?
So we've done the salt, and it doesn't seem to hurt the strength. What I would say is I wouldn't put it in a water-resistant bond, say if you're doing exterior furniture, because you're putting a soluble salt into a glue bond. We haven't tested it, but my initial thought is that's probably not a good idea. The sand is going to give you really thick glue lines, right? Or you're going to be pushing in and denting into the wood. We've seen no problems with that. If you're worried sometimes about the movement of the stuff, sometimes one or two dowels in there for alignment purposes can sometimes work pretty well. But yeah, we haven't seen any problems with using salt.
I think we've all screwed up a joint at some point, and when you've got it glued, you may even have it slightly clamped, and then you recognize that it wasn't actually quite aligned the way you want to do it. And like you said, pulling it once it's gelled is not great, because then trying to put it together again, you're going to get that air in between. Right. So what would be the best method? Let's say you're in that gel process of the glue, or maybe even slightly past that. you realize you messed up, you break the seal. What's the best way to then prepare it again for the next glue? Like, should we be using something to remove the glue there? Should we just sand it off? What's the best
So
choice?
there's a couple of ways that you can do it. If the glue line is still puttyish, you can take your scraper and scrape off. Otherwise, in most cases, what we've tested, we've just put a new fresh line of glue and just glued them back together again. And they're actually stronger. So we found that the thicker the glue line, the stronger the bond up to a certain point. And usually that's about the thickness of 2 sheets of manila envelopes is usually that perfect strength. So they're very visible, they're very strong, but after that they start to fall off again. And so just put glue on it. They'll look large, right? But again, if you want to scrape the glue off and then just put another line on, you're good to go there too. So, all right? All right. So let's talk about the assembly process. Let's talk about the joinery now, right? So the objective of joinery is to hold your stuff together, right? So this is what's fun about woodworking, right? We get to, when we design our projects, we get to figure out, well, what joinery do we want to use, right? And the joinery is supposed to be designed to handle the stresses that your project is going to see over the lifetime of that project, right? And so in this particular case, let's talk about mortise and tenon joints. Probably the most difficult joint to glue. And we're going to talk about the most difficult application for these joints is in a chair. Right? A chair is going to see a lot of racking force. I mean, if I put mortise and tenon in a jewelry box, it's not going to see a lot of stress, right? It's just going to be sitting on the counter, people just opening and closing the lid, so not a lot of force. So let's talk about chairs, so where there's really a lot of force going on. If I have tight-fitting mortise and tenon joints, I can glue that together with water and you're not getting it apart. Yes or no? Today. Today, right? But let's say I got an 8/4 piece of wood and I've put a mortise and tenon in. How long is that going to take to air dry? Could be a year or so, right? Before I really find out what that's going to happen. So with that in mind, I'm going to take a water-based wood glue now on that same joint and glue it together. What's going to happen? The mortise is going to shrink, the tenon is going to swell, and I have to pound it together, and I squeegee off most of the glue. Is that joint strongly glued? I don't know. I don't know. In most cases, once it starts to shrink, right? So there tends to be a lot of repairs on chairs. We get calls on how do you repair this and that. And so if you've got a mortise and tenon joint and you see some movement of that joint, it's going to break a fiber, which is going to allow it to move a little bit more, which is going to break probably more fibers until it fails. Then you have to repair it. So then okay, fine, I understand that. Let's make them a little bit loose. So now I've got a loose one, I put the glue on it, it swells it, pounds together pretty well. There's not a lot of squeeze out, it goes together. Well, what's going to happen with the glue? Right, so the glue is 50% solids. What's going to happen to the glue? Well, the glue shrinks. So now if I've got those gaps in there that I've got now pockets where the glue has shrunken away and allows for some movement, the same thing is going to happen. This is very similar to using a polyurethane, which then foams, right? And the glue guy puts on their label, fills gaps. Well, it does fill gaps, but it fills it with foam. That foam is 40 psi, whereas the glue itself, properly clamped without foam in the joint, will give you about 3,000 psi. And so, yes, it fills gaps, but it fills gaps with something that's relatively moved. So then, again, does the joint move? And if it moves, then fiber, and it comes apart. Well, I've gotten to the point where I make my joints, and I use an epoxy for my mortise and tenon joints. And I make them relatively, not loose, but relatively loose. I mean, if I put them together, I don't want them just falling out, right? So you got some in there. And so I use an epoxy. Epoxies do not swell the wood, so the wood will stay the same shape when I put it together as it was initially. It also, when it cures, does not shrink. So will stay the same volume. And so as long as I'm not getting any air in there during the assembly process, it's going to hold those fibers and support the whole joint. I had a rocking chair that I did with a water-based wood glue. It fell apart, so then I used an epoxy, and it is strong for that very reason. And so, again, you want to know what's your glue doing that. Now, the issue with epoxies can be a little difficult to work with, right? So how epoxies work is they got a part A and a part B, right? And you've got to mix them together in the right ratios. Well, why do I need them to mix in the right ratios? So you could kind of say that part A has 2 female ends, part B has 2 male ends. As soon as you mix them, they start to pop together into long blocks. The longer the block, the tougher the glue. So let's say I get them correct to the exact molecule. If I get them to the exact molecule, I'm going to have one long chain, which is going to be a very large molecular weight, and it's going to be very tough. The higher the molecular weight, the tougher the adhesive gets. If I'm off by 1 molecule, I'm at half the molecular weight. If I'm off by 2, I'm a third of the molecular weight, right? And so on and so forth. And so you got to be very careful and make sure that you're mixing them to the ratio that the company recommends. And that ratio is because part A and part B have to be equal, or you don't get good results. And not only that, but you have to mix them very well so part A and part B are together. Because if I don't mix them really well, I've got one area that's high concentration of part A, I got the other one over here in part B, so this part's soft, this part's soft, the middle may be as strong, but again, weakest link in the chain is going to dictate how strong the bond is. Right? If I've got a weak layer, strong layer, what's it going to break at? It's going to break at the weak layer. So you got to be careful. The other part of that is mixing air into it. All right, so now if I got air into it, I put air into there. Now the joint has got air, which is going to allow the fibers and so on to repair. So they're very difficult. I find that Morrison tendon joints tend to be the most difficult to do well. Just kind of keep that in mind. So let's now talk about dovetails. And I'm going to talk about drawers because those tend to be where most of the force is on a dovetail joint. So if you get your pins and tails in the correct direction, it's a mechanically locking joint, correct? Right? And so why do you put glue on it? Right? You put glue on it because if the kids put too many socks in the drawer and start pushing down, then the sides pop out. So what's the glue supposed to do? Glue is just there to lock those sides in because the joint is mechanically strong without any glue at all. It's just the popping out of the sides. Right? So let's say, do you need to glue all pins and tails surface area-wise? The answer is no. You can put a drop of glue on each of the pins and then pop it together. Are you going to get it apart? Are kids going to pop enough, right? In most cases, they are not. Now, I have seen, so we typically will get a bunch of videos in that people send us and go, critique this for us. And so somebody sent it in, and they were using Type-On 2 on a dovetail drawer, and it was pretty tall, and he had a bunch of them, and he was putting them on all the pins and tails, and the glue is dry already here by the time he gets to the last one, and then he pops it together, and so the person says, you should comment on that. I said, I don't need to. I said, but it's not glued together. I said, it doesn't have to be glued together. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, it's a press fit at this point in time. And I said, you've just put a layer of plastic on the outside, and now you squeezed it together. How much pressure is it going to take to get that press fit apart? Chances of getting that apart are pretty low, even if the glue had dried. So in most cases, again, what we want to understand, what is our joinery doing? What is the glue doing? And they have to work together for the longevity of the project, for all of the stresses that it's going to see in its lifetime. Again, if I'm doing a picture frame, right? Picture frame typically is going to be a miter joint, right? Are miter joints very strong? Would you make a chair with miter joints? No. Why? Because there's a lot of end grain characteristics to that, and end grain is weak. But if I'm making a picture frame, what's the forces on that picture frame? Gravity, right? Now, a spline would help if you're taking it off the wall, it slips out of your hands and hits the floor, right? Some of the miters can sometimes pop apart. And if I had a spline in there, that's great, right? What's the spline doing? Oh yeah, it's increasing the amount of surface face grain to face grain, which gives me a lot more cellulose to bond to. So again, once you understand all this fancy Japanese joinery that you see, is really getting that face grain to face grain contact to get you this stronger bond. In some cases, you can do a press fit in some of those, right? If you dry the wood out, and I think there's a chair, is it a stickly chair? You dry the wood, and then you put it together, and then as the wood moisture content comes up, it locks those pieces in place, no glue necessary, right? So understand what's the glue supposed to do, what your joinery is supposed to do, and work with it, right? It's more than fine. So let's talk about dowels, biscuits, and dominoes. If I'm doing edge to edge or face to face, do dominoes, biscuits, and dowels increase the strength or decrease the strength? They will decrease the strength. And let me tell you why. So I've got an edge grade table. If I put dowels in there and start stressing that joint, where does it break? The dowels will pop through the surface. Why do the dowels pop through the surface? Because you have just cut a third of the wood out to put the dowel in, and now that dowel only has to break through a third of the wood for that joint to fail. So are they necessary for edge grain to edge grain? No. Will the wood break in and of itself just being glued together? Yes. Does it have to be any stronger than that? No. Now, for alignment purposes, they are wonderful, right? And the reason they're wonderful is because from the glue standpoint, what I'm looking at is you're going to be able to get that together faster instead of having to put cauls all over the place, trying to align them before they get, and then the glue is dry before you get there, and then the piece falls apart in that way. So then the question comes in is, do I have to put glue in all of the holes? And the question is no. They're for alignment purposes. And you could just stick them in. As you're spreading the glue, you're going to get enough into those holes to lock them in place. And so it doesn't need to. I've seen more problems with people putting glue in the holes because you get a hydro lock from the glue, too much glue on there, and you're trying to put them together, and the pieces won't come all the way together because you can't force them together because the glue won't leave the hole. So I've seen a lot more problems with gluing the dowels in than I've seen otherwise. Now, you can make them smaller, you can do this and that. But do you need to glue the dowels in for face-to-face? No. Now, if I'm doing end grain to side grain or end grain to end grain, absolutely you want to glue those in. Because those are increasing the amount of cellulose contact and will greatly strengthen that joint. Questions at this point in time?
So would you basically recommend for alignment purposes just 3 dowels or?
Really, well, it depends, right? How long your board is and how wavy it's wanting to be, right? So you're going to be putting water on one side of that board, which is going. If your grain is wonky grain, it's going to want to move a little more, right? And so you'll want to put more in for that. But if you got straight grain, really 3, 1 for the middle, 1 on the ends. But it depends, right? Because as you put the clamps on to get it together, it does a whole bunch of funky stuff, right? So the more you put in, obviously, the more alignment that you're going to get. But that's going to be up to you in terms of what you're willing to work with. But they're not necessary for strength. Yes? No. Yes? No. So, make sense? All right, so I do a little bit about veneering. Usually people don't do enough veneering, and usually people fall asleep. So just one of the biggest things that you want for veneering that happens is veneer cracking, right? Over time, the veneer will start to crack on the surface. You want to make sure that your veneer and your substrates are at the same moisture content. Usually if you're using MDF or plywood or particle board, those are done in a hot process. And so the moisture content of those can be very, very low, especially if you've just purchased them and they were just manufactured. It takes a while for it to come up. And so what happens is those substrates will want to grow. And because you've put water on this veneer, it's gotten a little wet. So it's going to grow, and then it's going to want to shrink. The bottom wants to grow, and so that's where you get the cracking that occurs. Just quick thought. If you've got any questions on it, again, I don't want to bore people. We talked about end grain gluing, so we don't have to go into too much more depth. This will be available for you guys. You're welcome to post this on your website and read through it, and you'll probably fall asleep a few times before you get to the end of it. The quick and thick here, right? So when you're gluing end grain, there's two ways that you can do it well. One is to use a thicker glue so that you don't starve the wood glue joint when you're putting say the miter joints together. What can happen is, because that wood grain is so porous, if I put pressure on those joints, the glue can suck into the pores and leave me with a starved glue joint. So the best way to glue it, what we have found, is the strongest miter joint, or end grain to end grain is what we tested, is to do this. Put the glue on and rub it into the end grain until no more will go in. Do it to the other side till no more will go in. Then take your line of glue and then glue it together. That way the end grain has too much glue in it, it's hydrolocked, no more will go in, and now you'll get a relatively good glue line. Now this particular product on miter joints, you can glue picture frames together with no clamping whatsoever. And a lot of people go, nah. And my statement to you is, try it. You got a free sample. Everybody's got one. So what you do is you want a jig with a 90 degree and flat. And if you've ever done picture frames, you know why it has to be 90 degrees and flat. So you put the glue on. The quick and thick doesn't have to be pushed into both sides because it's so thick it won't dive into the end grain. So you put it on both sides, rub it together, put it in there and hold it for 15 seconds. Then count it out, 1001, 1002, 1003, 15 seconds. You can take your two pieces, set it aside, and do the other two. Then wait 5 minutes for the glue to set up a little bit, and then take it on a flat table, put glue on, rub it together, hold it, leave it for 5 minutes, then you can pick it up and do your other frame. In the morning, you could take that frame, throw it across the room, and it will bounce. This glue will get up to 3,000 psi, but it's flexible. The reason the glue is flexible is because this piece is moving this way, this piece is moving this way, so the glue allows for that movement without allowing. So it's our old molding and trim glue. It can be used for a lot of other things. But if you've got trim pieces, you can actually put it on the gluing surface, hold it up, rub it in place. Again, hold it 15 seconds. Obviously, if the trim is bigger than that, you may have to hold it a little bit longer. And then your arms will shake, and then you'll break the glue line. So you may want to pop a few holes if pins in there if it's too heavy. But for a light trim piece, I just basically put it on the glue surface, rub it in place till I feel it catch, and then hold it 15 seconds, and I walk away. So this is a unique glue. So I don't know, it's very good for making jigs. It will set almost as fast on MDF and particle board, almost as fast as CA glue does. So again, you rub it together till you feel it catch, and then in 5 minutes, you're ready to go. 5 minutes, you're ready to go. All right? All right, so the next part. Let's talk about freezing. So I was doing a presentation with people down in Florida, and I mentioned freezing, and they're like, what? So anyway, that's a whole other story. So when glue freezes, right, so there are little particles that float in water. The water then starts to crystallize, freeze out, and it likes to form crystals. It doesn't like to form crystals with the little balls of plastic in between them. So basically they're forming it and pushing the particles together. So they like to get pushed together when that freezes. Now, it's glue, okay? glue likes to stick together. We design it to stick together. So if the particles get pushed together, they're going to stick together. And to utilize the glue after it thaws out, you're going to have to mix it. You're going to have to beat those little particles apart, usually with a stick or a high-speed mixer. If you can't, then remember what will happen is you'll get, the particles will form like little grape clusters, right? And as you're gluing it, those grape clusters won't flow as well. And so usually if your glue freezes and thaws and freezes and thaws, usually it's not going to be as strong. Now in a lot of cases it'll work fine.
But you're talking about glue in a bottle.
The glue in the bottle. Glue in the bottle.
What if it just gets cold? If it gets 40 degrees in the shop?
Okay, so we're going to talk about that next. Can you hold off on that one? Okay. So again, you don't want it to freeze. Keep it in your shop. It's going to be better for it. Now, Type On Original 2 and 3 is designed to go through freeze-thaw cycles. But again, as it goes through those cycles, the glue doesn't come back as well. So recommend that you, if you can, just don't freeze it. Okay, so then we come to, thank you for the, we come to the chalk point, what's called the chalking point. This is the formulation for Type On Original. I'll wait. So basically we mix all these things together. We get little balls of plastic that float in water. And to form a strong film, they have to melt together, right? So you can see each of the larger particles and the smaller particles, they've all melted together into a film of plastic, basically is what it is. Each glue will have a different temperature at which it will melt together. And that will always be on the back of the bottle. And in this particular case, I believe it's 50 degrees. Yep, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. If your shop is colder than that, they will not melt together. And when I say shop, right, so normally we'll start getting calls. Usually they start in October, start in Canada, and then they come down as the weather gets colder. And usually it's, you know, my glue is, the joints fell apart and the glue's kind of dusty. Well, that's the chalking point because the glue does not, what happens is, if it doesn't melt together, they remain as particles. Basically, microplastics is basically what it is. And so you want to make sure that you're above that temperature. Not only that, because the Canadians will argue with me and say, my shop is at 75 degrees. Until I mention, did you bring your wood in last night? And they're like, no, I just brought it in from the garage. Okay. Right? So the glue is going to quickly get to the temperature of the wood. Right? It's a mass flow equation. The glue is going to quickly get to that. And it's going to get to the temperature of the middle of the wood, not just the surface. Right? So as you put your wood together, right? Now it's the cold wood that's in the middle. Well, it was warm on the surface initially, but now that it's together, now the cold can flow, right? And so you want to make sure that usually your wood's up to temperature for about 24 hours because wood is a relatively good insulator. That's why you can put it down on the table and as a kind of a hot pad, so to speak, because it doesn't transfer temperature very quickly. Each one will be different. If your shop is at 40 degrees, I think our Type On Extend goes down to 40. Type On 3 goes down to 45. You know, if your shop's that cold, no.
Yeah, just storage. It's up.
So storage-wise, you don't want to freeze it.
Okay,
As a matter of fact, if you've got Type On 2, so let's talk about shelf life, right? So most of our products have a 2-year official shelf life. That's meaningless to you guys. It means a lot more to my lawyers. What you want to know about is what's the usable life of the product. How long will it remain usable? And in most cases, if they're non-reactive adhesives, Type On Original, Quick and Thick, those that aren't water resistant, usually about 10 years, they'll remain usable. You can always add, because they'll dry out through the bottle a little bit, you can always add 5% water and mix it in without losing the strength of the glue. That's going to reduce the viscosity quite a bit too, so just note that. It'll get very runny. So be very, little bits will go a long way. Type On 2 and 3, which are reactive adhesives, water-resistant adhesives, usually at room temperature, they'll remain usable 4 to 5 years. If you need them to last longer than that, refrigerate it. You can get 10 years out of a refrigerated bottle. So very, very important. If you store it in a hot garage, you may get 2 years out of them. They'll gel, and if you take the cap off and take a whiff, it's very, very strong vinegar that occurs. Now, how do you know how old your bottle is? Everybody got one? Okay, so our lot number, which starts with the letter A followed by 9 numbers. Now they are going to be, right now go ahead, grab some for everybody. So it starts with the letter A. That letter A stands for Made in America. We do have a plant in China. We do not import anything from China. We actually opened the plant because we exported all of our furniture industry, and we had to follow it over there, unfortunately. All of this is made in Columbus, Ohio, where our plant is. So the next 2 digits are going to be for the year. In this case, it's 26 for 2026. The next 2 for the month, in this case 06 is June. The next 2 for the day of the month, which means that this was produced June 15th, 2026. This is relatively new. I get it right from the warehouse. You guys aren't going to find it this new. And then the last 3 digits are a batch number for the day, so that was the 72nd batch made that day. So, and that's how you can read it and tell how old things are. But again, it won't really matter how old it is, and more of how was it stored during that period, because we can control it up until it leaves our warehouse, right? Once it leaves our warehouse, we have no control over how it's stored. And so we're going to, if you call us and say, how long is it going to last, my lawyer, I'm assuming your lawyer's sitting next to you, and I'm going to tell you, it's got an official shelf life of 2 years. But if it's stored indoors, you'll get a much longer working time from it. Okay, we've talked about sunken glue joints, clamping time, right? So you're going to ask me, well, how long should I clamp it? And we talked a little bit about clamping, but I'm not going to know. And the reason I'm not going to know is I don't know how good your joinery is, right? I don't know how much stress that you had to overcome with your clamps, right? So the objective of the glue, right? So this is this is strength, this is time, right? So the glue at 0 time, right, has 0 strength, or this is a little bit, but negligible. And so it's going to go up, and then it's going to curve over. Our strengths, we get a week, right? You guys are probably going to be a little bit less than a week, would be my understanding. And so the faster setting glues are going to they're going to build that strength faster. That slope initially is very steep. Type 3 is going to be a little bit lower than that. And so the objective of holding them in clamps is to keep them in the position you want them to be in until the glue gets strong enough to hold against the forces that it's being asked to be held against, the clamping pressure. And I won't be able to answer that. I don't know how funky your wood is, how straight grain it is, and you'll have to get a feel. Typically for Type 2, I will go 2 hours. I've not seen anything past 2 hours that has caused it to come apart. Type bond, original and Type 2, usually 30 minutes is more than enough in most cases. Again, if your wood is wetter than that 8%. Most of your kiln-dried wood is going to be about 8%. But recently, with a lot of woodworking going on, and they're trying to get more wood through the kilns and stuff, basically they've been coming out higher in moisture content. And we've been seeing a lot more problems with that. We've been seeing some actually up around 12% moisture content coming out, and that can play a lot of havoc if you're used to an 8%, because it will cause not only the boards to shrink, but then they twist and want to take the shape of the tree at that point in time. So again, it's going to be up to you guys in terms of clamping time, but for the most part, if you leave it in 2 hours, there's not a glue out there that's not going to, you're going to be, after about 2 hours, you're going to be 30 to 40% of the strength of the glue at that point in time, which is plenty strong for most applications that you're going to be running. We talked about clamping pressure, joint preparation, right? You want to make sure you don't have burnishing, right? Burnishing, whether it's the dark burnt wood or even just a glazed surface, right? Because we're not talking about the wood glue penetrating the wood to bond, right? It's that surface. It's bonding to the surface of the wood. And so if you've got a glazed look, that's actually burnished the top layer of the wood. And it's going to have that kind of glazy, shiny look to it. So you want to take and sand it off. We're actually doing a test right now looking at, well, what is the best surface, right? Because I was doing this presentation at Mark Adams, and one of the, the teachers, is a Scottish guy. And he was a little on the arrogant side, but that's okay. We've all met woodworking guys who are that way. But his statement was, I don't care what you say, I sand against the grain, and so mine are stronger. And I'm like, okay. So usually when you sand, right, people go, well, I sand with 80 grit. And what we have found in the past was that if you sand, rough sand, you've got damaged fibers, right? And so now I'm gluing to damaged fibers. And when you break the joints, they look great because there's a lot of wood failure, right? But the problem is they tend to break at a lower strength. And the reason they break at a lower strength is, and everybody's seen that little whisker of wood, right, that's sticking up, and then you go pull it, and it goes down in through the grain, right? So it has a tendency to fail through the grain, which is a weaker bond than, say, something that has good, strong wood surface. So we're doing a test right now. We're doing right off of the joiner, and then we're going to do a card scrape surface, which would be like a nice hand plane surface. But we're horrible with hand planes, so we're going to do a card scraper. Don't ask me why. That's probably because it's a sharpening issue. And then we're going to sand with 80 grit, 120, 220, 320, and then with the 80 grit we're going to do with it. So all of them are going to be with the grain, except the 80 grit we're going to do one against the grain. So I can send the paper to the teacher on that. So we haven't gotten that done yet. Actually, I've just gotten the boards planed. So we should be actually gluing them up week after next. So I won't have that information for you guys until a later time. All right, joint preparation, joint design. We talked about joint design. Cleanup. We'll go through that with the 5 steps of gluing, which is here. So this is the actual purpose of this presentation, is to talk about the 5 steps of gluing. But without all of the other preparation, we'd probably be going through all of that stuff anyway, and so we're going to go through the steps. Okay, so the first one is do a dry fit. Now, why do you do a dry fit? There are a lot of advantages to it. I know a lot of people don't, but we get at least 2 or 3 calls a week on how to get things apart. And what I'm going to tell you is, I'm going to ask you a few questions. We're looking for a weakness. We're type on, we don't have a lot of weaknesses. But we're looking for it. So I'm going to ask you, well, what type of joint, right? Some of the joints are going to be easier to take apart versus not. So one of the things with PVA glues will start to melt around 250 to 280 degrees. Right? So that is going to be very close to the highest heat that you're going to see out of a hairdryer in most cases. Right? So if you take a hairdryer, put it on the joint that's going to soften the glue, you can get a spreader clamp on there. Typically, you can get them apart. However, if it is a pegged mortise and tenon joint, no. Right? It's kind of would be similar to trying to pull a dovetail joint mechanically the wrong way, right? So in a lot of cases, we're not going to have a good answer for you. And so that dry fit, right? So you're going to just end up, we're going to look for glues. So CA glues tend to get brittle, so sometimes popping them real fast with a hammer can sometimes break the joints. If it's a high glue, a little humidity, we'll get them apart. That's why violins and stuff, musical instruments are still made with the high glues, because it makes repairing them easier, and I don't have to recut either a side piece on a violin, which if you've ever made a violin, they take a long time, and the pieces are, for the shape of the pieces really give you the tone of the box. So you really don't want to be remaking any of those pieces. But you're going to struggle with it. It's not going to be fun. And so my statement is do the dry fit. Right? So when we talked about re-gluing, this is some of the re-gluing. if you get something apart and it's been a long time, you can always glue together with an epoxy. Epoxies will bring them right up. The epoxies bond to PVAs very, very well. So, if you go 17 hours and then re-glue the PVAs, you'll lose some strength. You'll lose about 25% of the strength. Okay, so a couple of things is, right? So when you do a dry fit, it gives you the opportunity to really look at it and go, I gotta sand this damn thing, right? And so where's the squeeze out gonna go? Right, at that point I can then tape it, get some masking tape, put tape on all of the joint areas, and then just kind of slice that tape. And then when I put it together, the squeeze out will go on the tape, and I can just pull the tape off. But I will tell you, use a good masking tape, because the sticky stuff, if it sticks to your wood, is really harder to get off than the squeeze out is. So use a good tape. Don't use the cheap Chinese stuff. And don't ask me why I know that. And then it's also a good way to look at how many clamps am I going to need, right? Because once the glue hits the wood, going, oh, I need a clamp here because it's not quite level, and then you're yelling at the kids and the wife and all of that, give me more clamps, and that's not a good thing either. So that dry fit will really help you on there. You can also look at, well, is the glue going to hit any of these bar clamps, and that's the way to tape them off at that point in time, because now you know how wide they have to be, so you could just tape them in the areas that they need to. So again, just a lot of things are beneficial in this manner. I know a lot of people don't do it. I don't, in most cases, do it either. Then you want to determine the correct glue, right? So how much time are you going to need to put it together? That dry fit should tell you a little bit about how difficult that's going to be to get it together, right? And if it's going to take you longer than the 20 to 25 minutes that, say, Type on 3, some of the longer adhesives, you may want to then go, I'm going to need to do this in flights, right, in sections. And that will help you do that. Make sure your glue's in good condition. It's always bad when, you got Type on 3. I use Type on 3 in my shop. And you get down and you got about a quarter of the board done, and then you get a chunk that's in it. It plugs the top, and then you're like, ah. Right? So just make sure everything's in good condition. In terms of the top, I know usually I'll get a question about the tops. And we continue to look at new designs for the tops. What I will tell you is our top at this point is the least worst design that we've been able to find. So remember, we not only do do-it-yourselfers, we do high-end shops and cabinet shops, and so they really like the cap because you could get a lot of glue out at a single time, and it's relatively wide. But the issue comes on is that cap can be hard to pull up, right? So one of the designs that we have is a bigger sombrero, right? Bigger brim on that sombrero, which makes it a little bit easier to pop up. These caps do pop off, by the way, on all of them. So you can pull them off, and they clean up pretty easily with just a toothpick, because this plastic the glue doesn't stick to, this plastic it doesn't stick to, but again, it's glue, it likes to stick, and our glue is pretty good. So, and you can pull off those areas and then just align the stem back and pop them back together, and they should go. The other cap that we're looking at is one that pops up and over, right? It's got a big round hole there. It tends to drain a little bit easier than those with the tang in the middle, right? So again, one of the issues is the drainage. The problem with these is once you get these, getting them into the corners and stuff, the cap gets in the way. If they hit the glue, right, then they spread glue all over the place. So again, it's really difficult to find a cap that really works, and we get calls all the time, your caps suck, but we haven't found a cap that the majority of people like any better, if that makes sense. So we continue to look. We take calls on people giving us their ideas and stuff, and with the 3D printers, it's great now because you can 3D print some designs and really kind of look at them. And so it's worked pretty good. So clean your applicator tips, get your brushes, now that you've got this, make sure the amount of glue that you put on is going to be about 250 square feet per gallon. Meaningless to you guys unless you're doing big sheets. Basically, the thickness of 2 pieces of copy paper. That's all that you need. If you're a single-sided gluer, that's probably what you're going to end up with. However, 2-sided gluers, you're almost always assured of a good bond because you've got glue on this side, glue on that side, and all you need is one single layer of flowable glue, right? And with two-sided gluing, you're almost assured of having that, right? Because you know the glue is wetted out on both pieces of the wood, and now all you have to do is get one in the middle. Normally, we have not had any, so all of the problems with joints coming apart have all been one-sided gluing. So, all right, then get some cleanup. If you're using a water-based glue, get some water. If you get glue on your shirt, keep it wet. If it's wet, it can't coalesce into a film, right, and can be washed out at any time. If you didn't catch it in time and it did dry, use a mixture of acetone, water, and vinegar. 1 to 1 to 1 tends to work the best. You soak it, scrape it, repeat as necessary. If it's real thick, you may have to do it a few times, but that'll soften any water-based wood glue. Get mineral spirits or acetone for if you're using epoxy. The acetone tends to work well. It flashes off pretty fast, but it pretty much cleans most of those other adhesives, urethanes and stuff. Urethanes will stick to your skin, actually chemically cross-linked to your skin, so wear gloves. Epoxies can cause, they've got a similar chemical to what's in poison ivy, so just be careful. If you're really allergic to poison ivy, you want to make sure you don't get into contact with epoxies much. All right, get some plastic sheeting down. When you're gluing up stuff and things drip on your nice carpet or a floor that you don't want glue on, that's not really the time to start cleaning it up. So you want to look at getting some stuff down. Then during the glue up, make sure your stuff is above the chalk point. We talked about most of this other stuff, right? So spread the glue as fast as you can. This should help. This will give you 250 square feet per gallon coverage, right? The bristle size and the spacing between them. How I do that for a board, so I'll take the glue bottle in this hand, brush in this hand, start over here, and just do a line and brush as you go. Then as you get to the end, right, so that glue is, however long it took me, older than this. So what I normally do is I'll put the brush on there and just do a quick swipe. Now all of the glue is at the same age. So that resets that working time at that point, okay? Glue brush is really great for that. And then allow it to dry. Right? And how long that's going to be, I don't know. That's going to be, you're going to have to kind of get a feel for what your shop is, what the temperature is. What was it, real humid last week? So that's going to be a lot longer than, say, in the fall when it gets a little bit drier. So, and I won't be able to give you that answer. So that's all it is. I appreciate you guys coming by and listening to me drone on about wood glue. All right, questions?
So if you have like the gallon-sized jugs for like refilling bottles, what's the best, any tips to keep that good longer in that jug between refills?
So you can, for that, just if you have room, you get a beer fridge, a glue fridge for your shop. Those will tend to keep the glue workable for very long periods, up to 10 years. And again, if it's taking you 10 years to use a gallon, you need more projects.
You touched quickly upon using paint thinner, I think, on a glue joint after you sanded it to test whether or not it will accept stain or not.
Right, so usually mineral spirits will soak into the wood and give you a darker color, right? So it always darkens wood almost like where you've added water to it. And it'll evaporate over time. So, but it'll tell you very quickly if you still have glue in the pores and sanding to do beforehand. Yeah, it's great if you're gonna, now if you're just gonna put a finish on, in a lot of cases the finish will work fine, because the finish typically doesn't soak in, but if you're putting a dye or a color into it, then yeah, you wanna.
The Tide Bond does have a liquid hide glue.
Yes.
Do you recommend it for doing repairs like on antique furniture? Because you've not spoken about that particular hide glue. I've just done some reading about it, and one article I saw was mentioning that it was good for the joints you were talking about that have so much trouble with the swelling,
Yep.
because it could slide in so much easier into the mortise and tendon joint.
Right.
So that was a good glue for mortise and tendon, for example, on one article I read. But you've not spoken about the Tight Bond liquid hide glue. What are your thoughts about it? And should we use it on like repairs of an antique piece of furniture?
Okay, so there's a couple of things about repairing antique furniture, right? And repair is, I mean, it's an art, right? So the issue with using a glue to do a repair is you got to get it, right? Remember, so we're looking at the chain of adhesion, right? What am I adhering to?
Right.
So if I've got old hide glue, which is deteriorating, I can't just glue that joint because now my good glue is bonding to old glue, which is bonded to the wood. What strength is that going to break at? It's still going to break at the old hide glue,
The old glue.
old glue strength, right? And so you have to remove that,
Right.
right? And so once you remove that, then does that change the dimensions of the joint itself? And so now I've got to make decisions, right? So there isn't really a great answer for that. So our liquid hide glue is the same as hot hide glue. We use a 251 gram strength hot hide glue, just like everybody else would do in a pot. Our pots are just a lot bigger. We do about 5,000 gallons when we make a batch. Then we add the difference with what we do versus a hot hide glue is we add a urea salt to that.
Correct. And that's
That-
what keeps it in the liquid form.
Well, it just so the gel point for hot hide glue is about 110 degrees, I believe. So you got to heat it up about 110 degrees or otherwise it starts to gel. It's somewhere around there. By adding the urea salt to that, that is reduced to 40 degrees. So you can still use ours as a hot hide glue, it's just your shop and all the wood would have to be under 40 degrees. So you'd have to heat it up to liquefy it, and then as soon as it hit that 40-degree wood, it would act just like a hot hide glue. So there's no difference. As a matter of fact, our glue is a little bit stronger than the hot hide glue, probably because the urea salt kind of gels that, not gels, but crystallizes that a little more, but it's not enough to really say, oh yeah, we're stronger. It's about 2 to 5% stronger. So it's not a lot stronger. I mean, you'd have to test we test 20 samples of each one that we break, and you can figure it out from there, but there's so much noise in just the strength of the wood itself that it's really hard to pick up that differential. So we don't say that, oh, liquid hide glue is stronger. So it gives you, what it does is it gives you a lot more working time.
Correct.
I mean, you can get up to like 30. I mean, if you so some of the ways to get more working time, if you moisten the wood above that 17%, the wood won't suck moisture out of the glue, right? You can humidify your working area. Take an ultrasonic humidifier and just blow humidity over your glue up area. That keep it from evaporating into the air. So you get an unlimited working time. Problem is you've got more water in there. The hide glue, because it likes to hold on to moisture, right? As a matter of fact, on high humidity, it'll actually suck the moisture back out of the air into the glue. And so it likes to hold on. So if you're at any humidity whatsoever, it's going to give you an unlimited working time. But the problem is you've got to be pretty dry for it to then set, right? And so that becomes the issue. Hide glue is strong. Very good glue. It's got the best heat resistance of any glue on the marketplace. It just, if there's any moisture with that, then it falls apart, right?
That's right.
Yeah. But we had a guy, he called us and he was very upset because he put his stuff in the oven to heat it up to take the hide glue apart and it broke the wood. And he's like, I said, well, did you put a pan of water in with it? And he said, no. Why would I need to do that? I was like, well, because it has horrible humidity resistance, but tremendous heat resistance. I mean, of all the glues, it doesn't soften, right? Because it's a protein. And whereas the PVAs are a plastic, which will soften under heat. So, did that make sense? Did I answer that question? Next question.
Do we treat, this is from online, do we treat plywood or MDF differently compared to solid wood?
Well, the MDF will tend to expand and contract equally in all directions, right? So there's a little bit of a machine direction in MDF, but not enough to be concerned. So it's going to expand and contract this way and this way, typically the same. Plywood is similar because they're all cross plies, so they're going to be doing this. Problem with plywood, though, long term, if you're seeing a lot of moisture changes over time, those plies will start to come apart. That glue is not, it's usually a urea formaldehyde, which tends to be real brittle, or not brittle, but real crystalline. And so it puts a lot of stress on those fibers as it wants to move. And that's why plywood tends not to be a good substrate for moisture changing areas for the long term. Solid wood, much better, but again, you've got to then plan for that differential movement between that tangential and that radial direction. And so you've got to, once you understand it, it makes sense, but it's knowing, looking at the end grain of your wood and all of that can be difficult sometimes. So like with a table, right? Do we, when we make a table, if I'm using plain sawn wood, because plain sawn wood has the cathedraling and it looks very pretty, right? Whereas quarter sawn or rift sawn can look a little bland in some cases just because it's straight grain. So when I make a table, do I put all of the plain sawn boards in the same direction, or do I put the direction opposite, right? And I've talked to a lot of table guys, and they're like, I put them all in the same direction. And I'm like, well, that's going to cause it to have a wider, arc to it. He said, yeah, but it's wider arc, and that you can control that by pulling it down than, say, having a wavy top. And it's harder to kind of, you'll always kind of end up with that waviness otherwise. And so I understand that, but again, it's what you guys are looking for, right? In some cases, the waving may look better for you than say, having to control that larger warpage. Any other questions?
Could you say a word or two about Gorilla Glue?
So Gorilla Glue. So we used to have a type-on polyurethane glue. When the COVID hit, we were having trouble getting raw materials, so we ended up discontinuing. They haven't brought it back yet. But the Gorilla Glue tends to work a little better on a variety of substrates. We were a little better on wood. But it's a polyurethane. It's a moisture curing product. So if your wood is above 17% moisture content and you want to get glue together, polyurethane works well for that because it reacts with the moisture and can cure. It does tend to do a little bit better with bonding to the lignin and the cellulose together. And so it does, in some cases, if you got oily wood, sometimes the polyurethane will work a little better because it can also bond to the lignin a little better than, say, the water-based PVAs will. But they will foam, right? So it reacts with water, releasing carbon dioxide, and that's what gives you the foam. That foam is very weak. And we're the most trusted adhesion supplier in the world. That's our motto. They put on their fills gaps on theirs, and yes, but it's with very, very weak foam, and I wouldn't say it's a gap filler for woodworking. Question?
With the date code that you went over on the bottles, when we buy glue, when would you expect the retailer to pull it from the shelf as expired? Or what should we be buying? How old should the glue be before we refuse to buy it?
So it's got a 2-year official shelf life. So I wouldn't buy anything that's over that 2-year on the shelf. Now I've done this presentation worldwide. I go through the South American stores and I'm pulling bottles off the shelf because they're already gelled. And I'm like, taking them up to the counter, you can't sell this stuff. And the people are looking at me like, they're going to put it back on the shelf, right? So it's like, just note that. Usually if you're buying at Lowe's, Home Depot, and most of the other stores, their turnover is going to be higher, and so they're going to get it relatively sooner. But if you go to these special, that are not woodworking stores, sometimes they can sit on the shelf for a while. So Be cognizant of that. I wouldn't, if anything's over 2 years old, unless it's type on original. Type on original, 10 years old, I'd still buy it. But 2 and 3, no. You want that date as early, or refrigerate it when you get it back. Rule of thumb: if it comes out of the bottle, you're halfway there. If it's not coming out of the bottle, it's not worth it at that point. The other part is if it's coming out and it looks stringy and it doesn't look like what wood glue is supposed to look like, then toss it, because it's getting close to that. So, anybody else? I appreciate you guys giving me the time. I'll stick around for a little while because I know some people don't like to raise their hands for questions. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, Bob. And then next month, September 5th, I believe, is going to be our next one. We're going to kind of continue this with Chuck Saunders. I'm sure he's going to go more into the molecular bondage and stuff like that.
I'll tell you why Type-on glue sucks.
And with some sanding and gluing tips.
Oh, that hurt. That hurt my soul.
All right, thank you all.